Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Elizabeth I, she regularly tops those polls as the greatest English monarch, but should she be there? She projected power and beauty through grand speeches and art, and she was charismatic, and she obviously had a bit of a cool head. But underneath all that, she was unafraid to silence and suppress and oppress and spill a lot of blood to protect her crown and expand her realm. Was that just what was required for a dangerous age? Or was she a cold and calculating monarch who deepened the divisions of that time and created a whole host of new ones? What should we think about Elizabeth I? It's such a difficult one. And here to help us get into the murky details is Anna Whitelock, historian, author, and professor of the history of monarchy at City University of London. Let's get into it. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Dan Snow, good to see you.
Let's just cut to the chase here. Queen Elizabeth Tudor, overrated?
Absolutely.
Really?
I think so. I know. I can hear
in this town.
I know Helen Caster's on text speed dial straight away. I think so. I just want to kind of suggest for a second that the whole idea of Elizabeth I, one of the greatest Britons, is more style over substance. I give her that she was the queen of spin.
Well, those portraits.
The portrait.
Oh, the Armada portrait. I'd follow that woman into battle.
Oh my goodness. The Armada portrait is the most incredible thing.
Yeah.
So tell me why you like the Armada portrait.
Because she's got a hand on the globe.
Yeah.
There's an enemy fleet foundering in the background. She looks fabulous. I mean, she just looks like someone in charge.
Yeah, but have you noticed? I mean, I'm not surprised that you talk about the naval formations, but have you not noticed the bow? No. The strategically placed bow at her groin.
Ooh.
This is the...
No, I haven't seen
oh, my goodness. It's probably good that you've said you didn't notice. And you were more fixated on the boats behind. I mean, this is the most amazing piece of spin. So one of the things when we think about Elizabeth I, we think of, the Virgin Queen. And that Armada portrait is the most incredible thing because it's after the Armada. So the Armada is, of course, 1588. It's the end of her reign. Elizabeth is in her, 50s. She's basically a single, unmarried, postmenopausal queen. It's not a good look. It's not a good look in the sense of what is the future? It's a dead end. There is no Tudor succession. So everybody's beginning to think, oh dear, this isn't a great thing. The prospect of her marrying is now not really a positive one because she's too old to have children anyway. And so what happens is that in that image, Elizabeth's body, which has been massively at issue for the whole of her reign because Catholics have basically said, of course, she was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. She's the kind of little whore of Europe. There's all this slander about Elizabeth, famously, of course, with Robert Dudley, but with a whole load of other people saying, that she wasn't a virgin. Absolutely not the Virgin Queen. That was the kind of scurrilous rumours that ambassadors would circulate around Europe. So what does Elizabeth do? She makes a virtue of being basically this postmenopausal Virgin Queen by saying, just like England's coastline was impenetrable, so is the body of the Queen. And so the strategically placed bow is to kind of symbolically represent her virginity, that she is chaste, that she's married to the realm, and this is a great sense of her kind of impenetrability and stability. And so she brings those two ideas together, and it becomes, this great currency, the fact that she's suddenly the Virgin Queen, which of course is a nonsense because she may well have been still a virgin, but the idea that she was somehow...
That's a good thing.
Exactly. I mean, it was exactly that it was a good thing was crazy.
But no foreign fleet's going to sail up the Thames.
Well, exactly. But so, I mean, one of the things that, I compare very often, Henry VIII, the big Holbein picture, prominent codpiece, because, of course, virility, sexual potency, political power, all are good. It all goes together. For women, chastity was it was necessary, but also at the time, people believed that women were more sexually voracious than men. So you kind of needed to get married pretty quick. So it wasn't really, chastity was, not the greatest thing in the world. So here was Elizabeth making a virtue in the most direct way in that portrait. And so in a way that represents, this being a mistress of spin, but covering up, of course, her failure to marry, her failure to produce an heir, and ensure a smooth succession.
Okay, we're going to come to those failures in a sec, but let's start with the good things, because this is what most people think when they think about Elizabeth. She regularly tops the poll for best English or British monarch. Why do people think that? You tell me. So yes, there's the spin. There is these baby steps towards something we might now call the British Empire. The buccaneers going out, Francis Drake circumnavigates the world. First bits of territory are being claimed, like weirdly in northern Canada, off the southern coast of South America, Tierra del Fuego, California, weirdly briefly claimed. Anyway, so that's all beginning in this period. And is that what? And then a bit of William Shakespeare as well. Like, why do people think Elizabeth's so great?
Partly, she lives a long time.
That helps. That really helps.
That really helps. And if we think about some of the most significant English monarchs, there's quite a few women up there. Victoria.
Because they live longer.
Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth II. They look after themselves.
You see? Come on, lads. Go to the doctor.
Exactly. So they live for longer. So that really does help. And that's one of the things that actually, if you look at, some of the early periods of Elizabeth's reign, the sort of disaster in, her first French expedition, for example, sort of French foreign policy disaster, that in itself would, that's quite bad. But when you look at her foreign policy across the whole reign, and particularly, of course, with the Spanish Armada, the small failures get overshadowed. So I think she's seen as significant because she was a woman, and she is seen as, in a way, exceeded expectation of being a woman in a man's world. Of course, she wasn't the first crowned Queen of England.
Right.
Plug, as you would expect.
Big sister.
For Mary the first Queen of England. But Elizabeth succeeds as a woman. She's a kind of successful woman in a man's world.
And she does a long time.
Long time.
So it's very choppy. Her brother, Edward VI, short, scary, little civil war, mini civil war at the end. Again, Mary, very short, religious repression. But... it's weird, isn't it, how we do grade quite highly for just being around a long time. And then there's even if they're quite passive, at least you don't get succession disputes. There's no sort of major crises, as long as they're just there, sitting
Exactly.
there.
And it's also that question about, to what extent is a monarch responsible for the period which defines them? So, how much of Elizabeth is responsible for the flourishing of Elizabethan age? So we talked about, you talk about, Elizabeth being a patron of the arts, or the sort of flourishing of individuals like, Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare. And then you think about Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and some of the overseas exploration. And sure, there was a kind of nod and some support. But, how much of all of these endeavours...
Yeah, there was a lot of technology.
Exactly.
There was a lot of change. I don't want to sound like a Marxist, but there's a lot going on under the old
totally. And of course,
there.
A lot of stuff happens over the period of her, 45-year reign. A lot of stuff's going to happen. And so similarly to the reign of Elizabeth II, huge transformation. And so she is associated with some of that.
Are you saying Elizabeth II did not directly contribute to Grand Theft Auto?
I think that could be
the
true.
Cultural flowering.
The cultural flourishing, exactly.
So she provides a bit of stability.
Yeah, and that's no small deal, of course, because, as you said, there's been what used to be called, back in the 1970s, the mid-Tudor crisis. Very infamous question on A-level papers. Was there a mid-Tudor crisis? No, there wasn't a mid-Tudor crisis, because ultimately the Tudors endured. But there was lots of change. First, a
bit rocky.
It was rocky with a boy king and then a woman. But Elizabeth, yes, she establishes stability.
What about Parliament? Does she deserve any credit there? Cromwell and her dad had sort of pushed statutes through Parliament. Is the position of Parliament within that, in our weird English constitution? Does she encourage that? Does she work quite collegiately with? I
think she does. This is where Elizabeth as a political operator becomes quite interesting, because I think, Helen Castor, of whom I'm a great fan of, I know she's spoken to you about Elizabeth and her brilliant biography, and she would talk about Elizabeth as being quite, deliberately prevaricating at times, but she being a real operator and a strategist and not giving away too much. And I think there was definitely a sort of sense of that. She did rely heavily on William Cecil, for example. She did step back at certain times. She wasn't as sort of interventionist in Parliament and pushing things through perhaps as her father had been. And similarly, of course, she's associated with a relative period of religious peace, relatively. She tried to create a middle way whereby as many Catholics and Protestants could feel at home within the English church. So she tried to be as liberal as possible. She tried to really stretch the envelope of sort of a definition of loyalty, and in that sense created stability for a time. And as you say, there was also beginnings of exploration, but there was also war with Spain.
We're going to come to the bad stuff in a second.
I want to talk about the bad stuff.
I know, we're going to come to that. So any other good stuff?
So, patron of the arts, cultural flourishing. Lots of that came from her wanting to have a court that, had a lively cultural scene, for want of a better term. She had these thrusting men around her who were ambitious. And rather than, I suppose Elizabeth couldn't be, as a female monarch, she couldn't lead an army into battle, but she did let some of these men do their thing. Often not following her orders, but by letting them do their thing, we do see circumnavigation of the globe and the establishment or the attempt to establish territories in different places. She also, I suppose, the Spanish Armada. And although we can, as historians now, go, but
how much did she do?
How much did she do? There is no contemporary source that describes the speech.
Is there not?
No, I know.
Oh my goodness me.
So of course the famous speech, "I have the heart"
at Tilbury, which we know, even if it did happen, happened after the Spanish Armada had already been defeated and were sailing up the North Sea.
So Elizabeth rocking up potentially in her armour was all, again, it's style over substance, because actually the Armada wasn't anywhere coming near, but this speech was certainly attributed to her, even though the first source of the speech isn't until 1623.
Okay.
So we don't know if she said it, but certainly she's been celebrated for it.
Yeah, but the trouble though, Anna, is the problem with leadership is a lot of it is about style, isn't it? That's the weird thing about it, is legacy does a lot come down to just the vibe you create, doesn't it?
Well, and I think this is the question. Was it a kind of intentional style of being quite, elusive at times? Letting factions be created and sort of play themselves out and staying above them. Outliving them. Was she very much a sort of skillful political operator? Was she lucky by virtue of the fact that actually she lived a long time, and therefore kind of some of the failures were kind of diluted? I would think that ultimately, her reign is defined as this sort of moment of, nowadays where English nationalism is seen to kind of flourish and be cemented in the popular imagination. And so I think that's why we have this kind of amazing image of her, Gloriana. And of course, films about the Spanish Armada were screened during, the Second World War. It's seen as this moment where you can rally England when you think of the Spanish Armada. Come on, everybody. And so she will always have that. And I think that sort of symbol that she becomes of English nationalism covers a multitude of sins.
And you say she's surrounded by men, but there's something quite interesting about English government at this point. Like there was, although it's far from being modern in any sense, and it's often catastrophic. Is there something about the building of the Queen's ships, the dockyard? She's carrying on her dad Henry's work. She's obviously promoting decent people into these kind of beginnings, these bureaucratic positions, who are doing decent work and helping to prepare a navy, for example, that will be able to fend off the Spanish Armada.
Yeah, I think that is true. And of course, she also has the challenge of having to deal with a lot of male egos, and a lot of male egos of people who, for them, it's just about going and defeating the Spanish and, piracy, getting treasure, making money from the New World. And, she's having to manage these men.
Yeah, the West Country lads are like, we can go and steal gold from the New World. This is great. Meanwhile, all the sheep farmers in Lincolnshire and Norfolk are like, you've destroyed our entire industry because now we can't sell our wool into Europe. So she's balancing that constantly.
Yeah, and I think, not wanting to be converted to Elizabeth as one of the greatest Britons, that is certainly true. The idea, people, think about, Margaret Thatcher having to deal with a sort of, largely male cabinet and, how did she manage? Think about Elizabeth. Think about a Privy Council, a parliament full of men who undoubtedly felt they could do a better job than her, who, would have been jockeying for position, who thought, come on, lads, we need to go and, take it to the Spanish. We want war. And of course, she prevaricated. But, when we think of the Low Countries, she prevaricated until 1584, when she finally decided that she would send an army in support of the Protestant rebels there. And people have been champing at the bit for years. So the fact that she, I suppose, wasn't deposed, wasn't toppled, and actually managed to balance these egos and keep Parliament. Of course, we see what happens to Parliament during the reign of James and then Charles, keeping Parliament relatively in check.
Yep.
That's not to say that they don't endlessly petition her to marry, but ultimately, there isn't, her actions aren't fundamentally circumscribed by Parliament.
All right, well, in that case, let's get into it. Let's give the other side of this, say why she does not deserve to be thought of as one of the greatest monarchs in this island's history. Should we start with religion? Because that's the bit everyone forgets. Let's start with religion and then go on to Ireland, which the two are obviously linked. So she is maiming and torturing and killing as many people as her big sister, right, Mary?
Yeah, exactly. So Mary, Bloody Mary, killed, 287 men, women and children. We all know the stories. We all know from the John Foxe's Book of Martyrs. Elizabeth, we just don't really think about it, but absolutely hung, drawn and quartered many, many Catholics, brutal murders of, Catholic priests and so on. Often really overlooked. I remember, doing the Tudors, for A-level. And even at that age, thinking, oh, Elizabeth, this just feels entirely, bizarre that's written out of the narrative. But
sanctions the use of torture.
Sanctions, yeah. But the point, of course, for Elizabeth is that after 1570 with the excommunication from the Pope, and then with the Bond of Association in 1584, the change is that Catholics become traitors.
Okay, so to break that, so the Pope excommunicates her and said this person is beyond. You can kill her and not suffer any.
Exactly. She's an infidel, she's a heretic, etc.
And the Bond?
The Bond of Association is where people were called upon to sign it and basically say that they would not support, particularly Mary Queen of Scots was in mind, but anybody to act against the life of the Queen. And so at that point, Catholics became traitors. So it wasn't simply them being, religious opposition and religious fanatics, but they were seen as traitors and hence were hung, drawn and quartered as traitors. So, for Mary, it was about purging souls and burning the souls of Protestants. For Elizabeth, it was about killing traitors. But in both senses, it was brutal. To be honest, I don't think you can, controversial position, but I'm not sure you can hold those killings against either Mary or Elizabeth. Yeah. Because, the ferocity of the burnings under Mary, fair enough. It was only over a number of, 3 years or so. But actually, this was the accepted form of punishment for heresy, burning was, and being hung, drawn and quartered was the accepted punishment for treason. So that was the currency of the day. So I think we have to be careful when we're evaluating the reigns by what our terms of reference are.
Sure. But we're just saying that it's not all rosy.
Oh, it's definitely not all rosy.
She did not bring religious harmony to the kingdom.
Absolutely.
that everyone could be part of. So and then let's go to Ireland, which when I talk to Irish colleagues, I mean, they're like, what, you Brits are obsessed with Elizabeth, and we remember her as one of the worst, in a pretty strong field, one of the worst English leaders out there.
Yeah, I mean, brutal actions in Ireland. I mean, she attempts a kind of colonisation, which ends up with, the brutality that was inflicted upon the native Irish. I mean, I know you've talked to a number of Irish historians. I mean, they definitely see the seeds of future conflict as being established and sown during Elizabeth's reign. And not only is there this, brutal actions against the Irish, stirred up by the English. I mean, there was a sense of, let's stir them up so that we can then act against them. But also, of course, there was the 9 Years' War between England and Ireland, which was a huge drain in resources, a very large English army. I mean, that's where an English army was sent abroad. It was sent to Ireland. And again, real repression, brutality. And why? Well, why? Well, the answer to that was in part that Ireland was seen as a springboard potentially for the Spanish. And the Spanish were meddling in Ireland. And so Elizabeth couldn't afford not to act in Ireland. But yeah, I mean, the Irish would say both Elizabeth and then, of course, James, who also attempted a colonisation, a plantation of Ulster, really the brutality and the degree to which they attempted to kind of cleanse. I mean, it was an ethnic cleansing of a sort, has sowed the seeds, for what followed in the centuries to come. Often overlooked in Elizabeth's reign. And
the plantation of Ulster, we should say Ulster, the northern part of, and now much of it in Northern Ireland, still part of the UK. And the plantation is just literally taking settlers from England, Scotland, and replacing native Irish people with those settlers, and taking land, throwing people off, enormous hardship and starvation, huge scale violence as well, with little quarter given often.
Exactly. And part of, the reason I think that Elizabeth has kind of not been, condemned for that is that it's taken, a long time when we think of studying Tudor history to actually bring in both Scotland and Ireland. I mean, even, back in the day when I was doing my A-levels, it was really about England, and then Ireland was a bit of a headache, and Scotland, too. It was very much peripheral to it. And it's, it's only, and people were like, is it English? Is it British? And it was just always a little bit of a mess. And so in many ways, it's only, relatively recently that we've understood, that Tudor history and the reigns of the Tudor monarchs needs to be understood by looking at relations with Ireland and Scotland too. And I think by looking at them in the round, we do get a rather different view of them.
Right. So we've got that. We probably should mention the traffic in enslaved people as well, because there is a little bit of that under Henry VIII, but England starts to get involved more heavily in trading enslaved Africans in this period as well. And
exactly.
She benefits from that.
John Hawkins, slave trader in the 1560s. I mean, Elizabeth sponsors and supports him in his. I mean, essentially, he's trading African slaves. So this. Yeah, I mean, the beginning of the slave trade can in part be attributed to Elizabeth, who has actually an African in her household.
I also, speaking of Hawkins, some of those, her relationship with those maritime, which people say, oh, she was a secret investor and it was great. I mean, she was deeply duplicitous, wasn't she? She sent Francis Drake. She got one of her subordinates to give him permission to go around the world, would not give him an official letter. So if he had been captured by the Spanish, he'd have been hanged as a pirate, or worse. He could not say, I'm here on the Queen's orders. So deeply double-dealing. And then also she would sort of send them orders and then countermand them constantly. And there was this sort of game of cat and mouse about trying to sail out of Plymouth before the Queen could send orders, refusing to let them. I mean, it is quite chaotic.
That is so interesting. And it's absolutely, I mean, and, is this Elizabeth being this amazing politician that is literally trying to make both decisions at the same time? And of course, we see this famously when she's under pressure to sign the death warrant of Mary, Queen of Scots, and having prevaricated for years, she eventually signs it. And then literally as the guy is leaving, the messenger carrying it, she basically calls him back. And it's exactly the same thing. So, I mean, when we say, Elizabethan exploration, and we think of, some of these great military men, I mean, did Elizabeth support them? Can Elizabeth be credited with that exploration? I mean, as you describe, it was lucky that, more harm didn't come to them. It could have been a very bloody end.
It could have been for many of them. And then obviously lots of harm did come to so the Spanish Armada people will obviously know all about. She interfered constantly with Drake's, and Drake used to get furious, and Howard furious with the sort of preparations that were made. They carried out an attack on Spain the year before. Elizabeth tried to countermand that after it sailed, so perhaps trying to have it both ways. But chillingly, her treatment of the Spanish Armada the sailors, the veterans, after that campaign, she left them just die on the quayside in the wharves. I mean, it was terrible. They starved to death, disease. I mean, it was absolutely appalling treatment.
I love how impassioned you are.
Yeah, I'm still upset about it.
I can see you're still upset about it. I can see you channeling your inner Drake.
But also, I find it difficult to talk about Elizabeth because I just think she is a person of such extraordinary contrast. Maybe because of the way I was brought up to think about her, and then what you.
But do you think she's the greatest Britain? I mean, you have a real sense.
Well, I think I've got a problem. I've got so old now and so messed up that I've got a problem with greatness anyway. Like, I don't even know.
What is greatness?
What is greatness? I don't know.
But also, I mean, for you, the kind of. Obviously, your whole kind of, I was going to say affiliation with Drake, would you say? Association with him. I mean, you feel that really quite passionately. And also the treatment, as you say, of the Armada veterans, which is such a disconnect from how we think of Elizabeth in terms of being this great, being the great triumph of the Spanish Armada. And of course, all the attempt afterwards to take it to the Spanish.
Oh my goodness.
Disaster.
Absolute disaster. Doesn't send a siege train with Drake and Norris, but now we're getting into the weeds there. But I think it's, but then you find yourself, because this is I don't know, there's something about the longevity of the reign and the sort of reasonable domestic stability that does keep you coming back from the narrowly English point of view. It's a successful reign. Right?
Well, this is where I'm going to sort of throw what I think is my kind of ace card. The succession. Yes,
yeah, right. She messes it up.
I mean, she doesn't even try. And
we should come to, it's one of the first duties of a monarch in a hereditary system to ensure succession.
Everybody knows that. That is the thing you have to do. Elizabeth II knew that. Think about all of those images and bits of footage in the last years of her reign, whether it was like stirring the Christmas pudding with Prince Charles and Prince George, the balcony shot at the end of the Jubilee where all her heirs were there, or the portrait where brilliantly she's got her handbag almost as an exclamation mark, where she's got the generations of Charles and William and George. She knew that. It was all about the succession. And of course, that was Elizabeth II when it doesn't really matter. Rewind to Elizabeth I, it matters. The monarch is the focus of all political power. The idea as a monarch that you wouldn't, preserve the succession and pass on not only your dynasty, but also the sense of security of the realm is like massively negligent.
And so many wars in this period caused by succession crises. I mean,
totally. Wars of the Roses. Yeah. I mean, succession crises all over Europe. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than this, failing to ensure the country's security. I mean, it's the number one thing. And so, this isn't just that, Elizabeth doesn't get round to kind of writing a will at the end of it, right? This is dynastic insecurity that is absolutely shot through her reign. She refuses to marry and dilly-dallies around that. Now you can say, yes, but there wasn't any one candidate that all the council got behind. True. Wouldn't it have caused, faction at home? Wouldn't it have caused potentially instability abroad? Potentially, yes. But, Mary I had to deal with this. She'd married Philip of Spain and so on. She tried to have an heir. Desperate failure, as it turned out. But Elizabeth didn't even try. And, of course, she then didn't even name an heir at the end. So there was this sense of what is going on. And although people will go, yeah, but she knew about the correspondence that was going on between James.
Right, so James, she's got a cousin, James VI of Scotland.
Exactly.
A distant-ish cousin. senior politicians at the English court are sort of writing to him going, yeah, don't worry, you're the guy and we'll make it all happen. So people have said, well, she turned a blind eye to that.
Well, people are saying, but then at the same time, people are writing and going, there are, it is not for want of heads. In other words, there is so many potential successors here that could be claiming the throne. And, there was a sense that the Spanish might try and claim the English throne. They might take advantage of the succession. I mean, it really was the talk of Europe, what was going to happen to England. And there was a real sense of impending civil war and, massive crisis. I mean, Elizabeth had acknowledged, her response to the succession crisis had been, one, to put more white makeup on, and two, to create this mask of youth, quite literally, where no longer was it permissible to show the Queen aging in portraits. But actually, we think that her ladies sort of sat for portraits wearing her gowns. But then this approved face mask, which the court sergeant painter approved, would basically then just be inserted. So it didn't show the Queen aging. And that wasn't just because she was vain, which she was, but it was also to try and maintain this fiction that the Queen would kind of live forever, because so much instability was being stored up, it was felt, for when she eventually died.
And it's weird because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, given that Henry VIII spent most of his time worrying about a successor, it's extraordinary that his daughter didn't spend any time at all.
No, exactly. If you think about all the, the desire for Henry to have a male heir, all of that going on. And the point is that Elizabeth didn't even try. Commentators at the end of her reign, first of all, there's, lots of accounts where she didn't want to go to bed. She had to be sort of carried to bed because it was almost like she knew the game was up and she knew that by going to bed it would be her deathbed. So she sort of lies on cushions in her privy chamber right at the end of her reign. And then accounts when she finally dies or she loses the ability to speak. And of course, those who want James to succeed record afterwards that when James's name was mentioned, she does a sort of crown gesture above her head. Yeah. That's convenient.
That's great.
So she's, pretty, doesn't have a great deal of inability to speak, but apparently still had the kind of will to make this crown gesture. I'm not sure. And of course, the great Tudor dynasty that people would go, amazing, significant Tudor dynasty, that dies out with Elizabeth. And by her failure to name and provide an heir or name an heir, a Scottish king inherits the throne. And although that turned out to be okay, ... did it, people didn't know that at the time. Scotland was the great enemy of England. So she'd set up a potential kind of, tinderbox of crisis and uncertainty. And had made no effort to resolve it. So abdication of responsibility, fundamental abdication of responsibility. And that is why I think she cannot receive the accolade of one of the greatest Britons.
Okay, well, you've made that very clear. But luckily, as in other areas of her life, she was blessed with good subordinates who quietly arranged the whole succession thing, and there was no civil war.
Well, indeed, and some people would say she kind of knew that, and she just was, being a bit savvy and letting them get on with it, and knowing, as she did say at various points, all eyes will turn to the rising and not the setting sun. So she knew the minute she said, I'm going to be replaced by James, everybody would look to him and she would become entirely politically impotent. So, that's in defence of her.
High risk, though.
Incredibly high risk. She was, playing a very dangerous game with England's security. And this being the woman who, is credited by being the great symbol of English national identity with the Spanish Armada, that in itself was largely a myth. And the fact that she failed to ensure a smooth succession, certainly by her efforts, is not held against her at all.
Well, she was succeeded by a Scottish king. There you go. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you, Dan.
There you have it. If you're judging by stability and cultural impact and sort of good national vibes, then Elizabeth clearly delivered. But beneath that superficial glory and grandeur, there was a much darker side to Elizabeth's rule, obviously. The woman who projected peace and brilliance, but she ruled with a calculated cruelty when it served her, and she seemed to be able to thrust England into some very long, expensive and uncertain wars. She was responsible for some of England's darkest deeds over the last few centuries. Whether you fall more on one side or the other, it's up to you. Thank you for listening, though. Let us know what you think in the comments, and make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Thanks very much, as ever, to the fantastic Anna Whitelock, and to you for watching.